Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon, Karen, for being with us. It feels so good as if you're with us in this campus. So sometime maybe face to face. So on behalf of Sri Devaraja's Academy of Higher Education and Research, I extend a hearty welcome to all the participants who have logged in. And our academy, the mission of the academy is to be on the forefront of competency-based education that we have been offering. And we believe that leadership and strategies to don this role of leadership in every health educator is primarily important for implementation of any curriculum that we talk about. And to talk about it, I'm so glad that we have Dr. Karen, Deputy Dean of UTA, the University of Cape Town from South Africa. I request Dr. K.N.V. Prasad sir, our registrar, to introduce the speaker to the gathering. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vinita. I'm audible?
A little louder, sir. We would want to.
Yeah. I'm audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to be in these type of webinars where something out of the box is talked about, and we try to learn a lot about leading the teams. And today we have got a very renowned personality as well as an educationist, and I'm quite honored to introduce her to the gathering today. Dr. Karen Beck is public health medicine specialist. As Dr. Vinita just now told, she is Deputy Dean of Undergraduate Education in Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Cape Town. Just a brief about her educational qualification. She did her Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Chirurgy at University of Cape Town in 1994. And she has got a diploma in child health. In fact, I am from pediatrics, Dr. Karen, so it's nice to know that you are a child health specialist also. And in 1996, she got diploma in child health. She has got diploma in obstetrics in 1997. Then she went on to complete her medical specialization for obtaining a fellowship in public health medicine in 2002. Karen is a trained depth facilitator and accredited Thomas PPA practitioner, as well as certified in the Leadership Circle Profile and Barrett Values Culture Transformation Tools. Karen is a true example of lifelong learner, and that is aptly reflected that she recently has been endowed with Fellow of International Famer Institute in 2021. So that was her qualifications, educational qualification. As far as her experience is concerned, she's a public health medicine specialist and has held a variety of management, technical expert and governance positions in hospital and health services across various sectors, including public, private, and NGO sectors. And Karen was an independent public health and management consultant for 10 years in the fields of strategy, health policy, quality improvement, leadership and management, mentorship and coaching, performance processes, organizational design, and organizational culture. Karen has been appointed to a number of national and international technical task teams related to health policy, quality in health systems, and human resources for health. Karen's involvement in teaching and learning as an educationist has spanned 18 years at an undergraduate and postgraduate level through curriculum design and renewal for the MB-CHB program that is offered in South Africa, initiating, convening, and lecturing on accredited programs and modules in universities, as well as developing customized education and training programs for private organizations also. As far as the research profile of Dr. Karen Beck is concerned, she has got extensive experience in research over the last 15 years and has included contributions to a large multi-university collaborative partnership in health leadership and management, which led to development and co-creation of an evidence-based leadership competency framework and Leadership Development Strategy of the Western Cape Department of Health. She has got experience in running a large PEPFAR funded grant through CDC for quality improvement in rural health services, which incorporated technical support for National Department of Health through the development of National Strategic Framework for High Quality Health Systems and contribution to National Lancet Commission for a High Quality Health System. She has even got experience as research and master's supervision for Janssen Pharmaceuticals, as well as the contribution to the development of National HRH Strategy 2030 as a part of Ministerial Task Team for Development of National Human Resources for Health Strategy work stream. She has, which ultimately led into probably a contribution to work to the national policy space and have included development of a national laboratory policy. She has in fact worked on NHI green paper and white papers from 2011 to 2019, and more recently has contributed in COVID-19 guidance development through the College of Public Health Medicine Task Team. Karen recently held the positions of Senior Lecturer and Program Coordinator for Postgraduate Diploma in Healthcare Management for the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University before being appointed to the position of Deputy Dean, Undergraduate Education at the University of Cape Town, Faculty of Health Sciences. So indeed, it is privilege for our academy, Sri Devaraja's Academy of Higher Education and Research, to have a speaker with such a vast educational, research and public contributory experience, both at national and international level, to be with us. And ladies and gentlemen, I present before you Dr. Karen Beck for her oration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Wow, that almost doesn't sound like, but thank you. I really do appreciate the warm welcome, and I really do thank Dr. Shankar for inviting me. It really is an honor and a privilege, and so grateful that we could squeeze our diaries and make sure that we could be here. And I'm really honored to speak to close to 60 of you, so thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, Vanitha, if that's okay.
Yes, we have.
Awesome, thank you. And there we go. And so I should be able to do that. Just is taking a little, my mouse seems to have disappeared. So let's see if I can find it again. All right, I think I might have to just stop share and try again. These intercontinental challenges. For some reason, does anybody remember what the shortcut is to share screen? I mean, to go into presentation mode, because for some reason my mouse has decided not to cooperate. Okay, either to stop or share.
Please stop sharing and then try again, Karen.
I've tried and then it's...
Or else maybe you can mail it to me and I can do that for you. I can share this.
I think it... Colleagues, what I'm going to do, just while we get the technology sorted out, is to... seems to have just frozen on my side. Can you kick me out on that side, Vanitha? So if you force me to stop sharing and then I'll try and share again.
Yeah. Kiran, would you like to mail it to me? I shall share it.
Vinita, just make her the co-host.
We have made her the co-host. Kiran, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear. Now we
All
can
right.
try sharing the screen.
Let's try once more. I'm going to share. Share. Let me actually try and share screen rather than sharing the presentation, and let's see whether that works better. Rather than sharing the presentation.
Yeah, good.
All right.
Yes. Now
All right.
maybe you can go into the presentation mode. Yeah.
Yay! Everybody
Good
can
job.
see it.
Done. Yeah.
All right.
So
as I was saying before I got bumped out, I'm going to share with you a little bit quickly about South Africa, just to provide you the context and the university and the faculty, and then head into what we're doing around curriculum and health professions education. So first of all, South Africa is sitting at the bottom end of Africa. We have a quadruple burden of disease. No doubt this is very common in your space, but certainly we have had one of the world's biggest HIV/AIDS epidemics. We have one of the world's highest TB epidemics. And so we disproportionately carry that HIV and TB carriage. And so that's the red in our, and we're slowly managing to get through one of the world's largest HIV treatment programs. We're slowly managing to get our TB and HIV a little bit more manageable. Our non-communicable diseases are large. And then, of course, similar to many other countries around the world and developing or low to middle income countries, is communicable disease, perinatal conditions, and maternal conditions. We also have a fairly high injury and violence burden. And so within all of that, our life expectancy is certainly lower than India, and is one of the worst in the world. And we just going to move that across so that I can't see it anymore. There we go. And so you can see that we're sitting in this space. See if I can get my pointer going. Pointer, laser pointer, there we go. So we're sitting in this space of really one of the lower life expectancies. Sadly, we're also one of the most unequal countries in the world. And so this has made it to Time front page. This is one of our informal settlements or slums next to one of our most privileged areas in our country. Our health system is supposedly, according to the World Health Report of 2000, one of the most responsive, but I think at that point it was particularly because of our HIV/AIDS treatment program. But in fact, the overall performance of our health system is relatively poor. So that's the context of our country. We have this unusual situation where I'm sure most of you are used to this graph of life expectancy followed by national income, and that we spend a large portion. We have a relatively high gross national income, and we spend a lot on health, but actually don't necessarily reap the rewards when we look at our life expectancy. And so we are situated in one of the most beautiful parts of the world at the foot of Table Mountain. And this is our broader university, which sits here. This is one of the main campuses. And then our own health sciences campus is sitting a little bit around the corner. If I go back, our health sciences campus is kind of sitting down here at the base of Devil's Peak. So our health sciences campus is sitting next to the world-renowned Groote Schuur Hospital. This is the original Groote Schuur Hospital where Chris Barnard performed the world's first heart transplant. This now is mainly teaching and office space, and this is actually now the teaching hospital, this H-shaped building in the Groote Schuur Hospital. And the majority of our campus sits just across the road, together within this office space here. So we have in terms of numbers wise, I'm not sure that we really compete with some of the larger universities around the world, but certainly our entire university is around 34,000, and our own campus sits at around 4,500 students in terms of 2,500 undergrads, around 2,500 postgrads, and around 2,500 staff. So this is us, and I sit in this building right here. I'm looking out at the beautiful view of the mountain just up here. And so we started, it's the oldest medical school in Southern Africa, and obviously with many famous advances, including, as I mentioned, the world's first heart transplant, as well as the technology for the development of the CT scan came from our university here, sitting at the base of Table Mountain. So we run 5 undergraduate health professions programs, MBCHB, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech language pathology and audiology, as well as a number of other science programs, but those are our health professions programs. And our stated aim is to produce a generalist health professional capable of providing healthcare in a decentralized health system, imbued with a spirit of inquiry and committed to the principles of equality, social justice embodied in the primary healthcare approach. Now, no doubt many of you have found that your espoused aims don't quite meet what you actually do. And so we are, have found that within our South Africa, that we have these social burdens of poverty, inequity, and violence, as well as significant mental health challenges, which impact on our students and where they come from, looking at what we call our social determinants of learning. At our own university, over the last 7 to 10 years, we've had this cumulative trauma of multiple waves of disruption, initially with fees must fall, and following that with a number of gender-based violence. So one of our own students was brutally murdered, and just brought to bear the range of gender-based violence that we face, followed by mental health, where challenges where our previous dean died by suicide, and just really brought to bear the extreme challenges that we all face. And so we sit with a curriculum that is over 20 years old now, was very modern in its time, but it no longer meets the student needs in terms of the social determinants of learning. And so we're currently in a space that I'm spearheading around curriculum change initiatives across all of the programs that we're facing. Our students come from a wide variety, so they come from this space of inequity, social inequity, poverty, disadvantage. And so we end up with a number of students who are at risk of interrupted progress due to these social determinants of learning. And then that puts into the space of our teachers, where academics who have certainly been trained in teaching and learning, but they aren't experts in curriculum design. And they are really this nexus between students and curriculum. And whilst they are teachers, they're not curriculum designers, and they're certainly not trained in leadership. So most, as I'm sure you will also attest to, have ended up in leadership positions by default, and are often then end up in this kind of hybrid leadership space, where they primarily set out to be clinicians, have ended up as teachers, and then very much have ended up as default leaders. And so what we're needing is a transformed, responsive curriculum in each of our programs. So we have 5 programs, so we're needing these 5 curricula to enable the delivery of socially accountable graduates for the future, and particularly for the South African context. And so we've started these concurrent interventions aiming for outcomes, where we're looking at curriculum transformation, hoping to do that through some faculty development and educational leadership. And this is where my talk today will be focusing on, as well as looking at detailed student analytics to try and understand where our students have been at risk of interrupted progress. And so we have these three kind of looking at each other, going together, these multiple interventions coming through out the other side to hopefully look at a transformed responsive curriculum with competent educational leaders and a higher throughput of our students at risk of interrupted progress. And so we have a kind of a long-term view, but we are funded by our National Department of Higher Education, who usually fund us as part of a subsidy program, but we also then have this dedicated grant called the University Capacity Development Grant. And so we have some funding that is specifically looking at this faculty development. And so we have these multiple kind of funding and research projects that are looking at. Our Senate has a teaching and learning committee, and there's a particular curriculum change work stream. We have another UCDG funded grant looking at language and decolonization. And we have a unit that specifically looks at analytics for student success. And so I have this very complex stakeholder basis that I'll come back to, but we have very important partners in our Western Cape. So we're in the province of the Western Cape, and we share a clinical training platform. Very importantly, we're looking to engage more and more with our community. We have our university supporters. We have a number of governance streams. And then, of course, we have very important stakeholders, being students and their leadership, together with some of our conveners and teachers and some champions in that space. So the three interventions, just very briefly, I'm going to mention the other two interventions because they link so closely, and then I will spend the time working on the intervention of the educational leadership. And so we're looking at, in terms of our success unit, is looking at the data to be able to identify what works, what doesn't, what are the enablers, what are the constraints, and then to look at developing an intervention for unlocking student potential. We then, which is also being driven by myself, is faculty curriculum workshops, where we're looking at a range of different stakeholders and focus areas. And the output that we're looking at for this year is to look at a transformation framework that our educational leaders will be looking at for their projects. And so we've started towards the end of last year, and very, very important imagery looking at this kind of dynamic, integrated space for curriculum, realizing that we don't start from a clean slate, that there's very important evidence and literature that we need to be looking at, very important curriculum policies and frameworks at a country level, at a university level, and at an accreditor level. So in our country, the Health Professions Council of South Africa accredits all of our health professions programs. And so each of those are important to be aligned to and coherent with our university strategy, our faculty strategy, our country human resources for health strategy that I was privileged to be a part of and to give input into, and then to drive some of these key important principles. And so our Senate principles have looked carefully at some of these key items around curriculum, not only being around knowledge in a single course or a single program, looking at graduate outcomes or graduate attributes that they're otherwise known as. We are a research intensive university, so how do we do that? How do we look at making sure that that covers that space? The historic relationship between knowledge and power. So you would also come from that space of being a colonized country, and so how do we unbundle some of that colonization relationship between knowledge and power, and how do we decolonize our curricula, the pedagogy and theory of learning, our own disciplinary language and grammar, and then the inequalities that our students arrive with. And so we've been unpacking many of these spaces of these principles and paradigms as I've been speaking to. And so this final intervention, which is where I'm really going to be focusing on today, is really understanding, is really sharing with you some of this journey that we're going on towards this educational leadership fellowship. And so working towards understanding what it is that we're needing. So educational leadership hasn't been a feature in our particular faculty development initiatives. Most of that faculty development has been around the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so there hasn't been much of a culture of collective leadership or agency in transforming curricula. And so we're really looking at building that collective leadership agency as we move forward. The evidence tends to show that faculty development interventions, similar to our own experience, is that the focus has been on upskilling and teaching and learning and assessment, but limited upskilling in terms of curriculum design. And then when one looks at the leadership component, which is my area of expertise, is that leadership development tends to prioritize skills and competencies for service settings rather than educational settings. So health services and clinics and hospitals and programs, health programs, rather than in educational settings. And that there is relatively limited evidence of interventions focusing on educational leadership and health professions education, and certainly none in Africa. But it has, the limited that there has been has demonstrated that development of educational leadership can be leveraged for curriculum design. So that particular PhD was based in the Nordic countries. And so that's some of what we're looking to do. So this project goal has been to look at enhancing the quality of educational leadership in curriculum design through a faculty development initiative. So this is this fellowship program that we're looking at, which is project-based. And their projects are looking at actually changing curricula. So the idea is that we're creating a critical mass. So rather than spending all of our time kind of convincing faculty members who have other bits and pieces on their minds, is that we do this at the same time. So it's a bit of looking at Malcolm Gladwell's work on tipping point, and to say, let's build this critical mass of faculty members as educational leaders. And so we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it, so that we create this more responsive, so we're changing the environment, we're changing the culture, we are changing that we have a number of people all focused on curriculum change all at the same time. And so it may kind of end up a little bit messy, but at the same time create that critical mass. And so it's two cohorts looking at our funding. So this year, 40 fellows, and next year, 40 fellows over a 12-month period. They have this blended approach to contact learning sessions, as well as a very intentional community of practice, and then they deliver a curriculum project. Fortunately, we already have the funding in terms of this capacity development grant. So we have these 3 activities in this fellowship with very explicit teaching program, educational leadership program, or co-created collaborative program, a community of practice, and then these curriculum renewal projects. So we have this very complex theory of change, but hopefully I'll just take you through it very, very carefully. So there's these 3 interventions. The one is this leadership, the ELF, the Educational Leadership Fellowship, the curriculum transformation workshops, which are faculty-wide, and then this very specific student success unit that then look at developing this, this program, building, establishing a collaborative, and getting these projects off the ground, while we at the same time are doing all this consultation and developing the data, which then ends up changing identity in educational leadership, building the knowledge and skills around curriculum change, and as well as having these projects that are actually happening. And then longer term, seeing that we now have this leadership that will drive stewardship of education and curriculum management processes, as well as having this transformation framework that kind of builds that everything curriculum-wise is now built around the sort of skeleton on which now all of the meat of the curriculum projects and things get changed. And we ultimately then have responsible and accountable educational leadership, an inclusive curriculum, a responsive, future-focused curriculum, and that they're better aligned to students' needs. And so we are producing socially accountable graduates. So that was a really rapid run through of a theory of change, but just to show you that all three of these interventions are working together in the same theory of change. So now that was really kind of just helping you kind of get to this context of, so what are we doing? So the learning objectives for the ELF are to develop individual and collective agency. So many leadership programs, and I've been part of them, focus on individual leadership. That individual gets trained and then goes back into an organization that often isn't ready to receive some of these changes. And so the individual isn't supported and often then either gives up or bumps their heads so long that they become a little bit bitter and twisted, or they leave and go somewhere else which is more receptive. So it's really important to have to build this collective agency, to make sure that it's still grounded in scholarly practice. This isn't about kind of just bringing in anything new, but that there's really a good foundation of educational theory and scholarly practice, and that we're building those knowledge and skills in curriculum design. And quite intentionally, we're looking at curriculum design as being a co-production, a collaborative space, rather than a kind of a top-down approach. And then to make sure that we're also strengthening these individuals' teaching practice, reflection, and review. So we're building the organizational culture of teaching and health professions education at the same time. So there's the space of personal learning, this collaborative learning, and working through this Kolb's experiential learning model. So back to these three elements of the program. So this leadership program, the curriculum content has a very explicit leadership side and a very explicit curriculum design side. And so I will take you through a little bit of that. So that's the first activity. The second activity is being very explicit about a learning collaborative, which comes from my quality improvement background or community of practice and a health professions education background. And so we're really making sure that we build this community, this tipping point, so that health professions education is valued as an entity, as a practice within the faculty, and that they build and learn from each other, and that this becomes a longitudinal process and not just a once-off event. And so they're looking to build a trust-based community, appreciative inquiry and dialogue skills, and particularly use of peer support and feedback. And then they have this third essence, which is a curriculum project. So every fellow has to be involved in a project. It needs to be at minimum at course level, although really excitingly, we've got fellows who are coming in at head of department level, fellows who are looking at this at a program level. So this is really exciting. It needs to be aligned to the curriculum framework, and we're guiding them so that there's a kind of a standardized approach, but very flexible in the way in which it gets delivered. So the deliverables by each of these fellows by the end of the year is that they must have a curriculum project plan. So a curriculum needs to be designed for their course. At minimum, if they're looking at it higher up at a program level, that's okay, but at minimum at a course level. They need to be engaging and preparing for their monthly sessions. They need to be reflecting regularly and producing a portfolio of journal reflections and combining that with numerous artifacts into their portfolio. And then they need to be engaging in the community of practice. We expect them to be collaborative and co-creative and self-directed in their learning. They need to be present and participate and engage asynchronously, to check in and ask questions, and to reflect regularly and to ask for help. That's really important. We want to create a culture where it's normal to ask for help, but also to offer help. And so it's been really, we've had a retreat followed by 2 sessions, and it's just been so heartwarming to see the receptiveness of this is the first time in this faculty that conveners are meeting across programs, so interprofessional space, across levels. So we've got HODs, program conveners, all the way down to a lecturer, all kind of engaging and interacting in the same space. And what's really encouraging is that almost all of the projects are turning out to be collaborative projects rather than individualized projects. So it's certainly very encouraging at its start. We do have a comprehensive evaluation plan where certainly I'm hoping to see identity development as they become, as educators build their capacity and their identity as educational leaders, that they also will be building knowledge and skills around curriculum change and actually practicing, so putting it into practice around that. And we obviously are looking at Patrick's model and making sure that this evaluation will be across all of those levels. So we're trying to practice what we preach. So now moving to a little bit more of a theoretical spaces. So what are we actually doing? So that's the kind of process and what we intend to do and come out with it. But what about how we are actually doing it? So we're having these multiple kind of spaces of internal consultation across the faculty, stakeholder engagement with our Department of Health, with communities. But this is this particular intervention around the change agents. And so the focus is that we're creating personal leadership and self-mastery so that they are taking on the persona of change agents and leaders. We're also, so you can see there the close link between the change agency and leadership. That they also are scholars in teaching and learning and curriculum, and that they are delivering, that there is an exit point. It's not just that we're changing people, but we also have deliverables of these curriculum change projects. So part of that personal leadership and self-mastery is very clearly understanding themselves. So self-awareness is quite fundamental, understanding their own belief systems, their strengths, their blind spots, what their work behavior styles are, how they can modify and move that, mentoring, coaching, reflective practice. And so really coming back to some of Brené Brown's work of who we are is how we lead, and to fundamentally kind of understand that. Also working a lot on Peter Drucker's work of managing oneself. And so we really have to cultivate a deep understanding of ourselves and where we can make the greatest contributions, and then moving that into team environments. From a change agency point of view is to really fundamentally understand change and transition. And the work of William Bridges, for me, is really important, that often we tend to focus on the organizational change and not on the personal transition, so that deep psychological reorientation that we have to make when we need to change, and that often deeply impacts our sense of meaning, self-worth, identity, our reality, and that we're not all in the same space when we're going through this change and transition. And so we need to understand the marathon effect that happens in that space. The change agency can only happen when we are outside of our comfort zones, and to feel comfortable with that in uncertainty and ambiguity, and that many people, in trying to understand our agency and leadership, tend to think that we need to have direct reports, and that in fact most of our change doesn't occur in that space of the organization where we are managers leading direct reports, that in fact a lot of that happens in our sphere of influence. So understanding what is our sphere of influence and how can we influence in that space. And then to really understand our stakeholders, where are they and how do we influence, to map them and understand them better, and then to understand how to influence them. And then in terms of scholarship and curriculum design, to make sure that everybody's foundations are good in teaching and learning theories, that we start to understand our models and frameworks and approaches towards curriculum, that we're able to map our curricula, and that we start to understand doing things at a programmatic level, not only, and so we start to see some of those. So we certainly can see some of the weaknesses in our current curricula. We do not have a system of assessment or programmatic assessment, and so that's something that we would like to see as an outcome of this curriculum transformation and change. And so these projects then, you can kind of start to see, I hope that we, through these many different projects at different levels, that we slowly kind of have this critical mass that we then end up with a transformed curriculum. And so each of the fellows are taking on a curriculum renewal. So it's a bit of trust on our part, because it's a bit messy that there's lots of moving parts. But if we wait for everything to happen and kind of build the airplane first and then fly it, it's going to be 5 years, 6 years. I was at Stellenbosch University before this, and we built this magnificent curriculum, but it did take us 5 to 6 years. And we're not really sure that we want to wait that long. And so it requires quite a lot of trust on our part to trust this process, that we're building leaders, we're building this critical mass of people who have scholarship and leadership and change agency, and we're consulting at the same time, and we're engaging with communities at the same time about their expectations, and then it hopefully will all come together and coalesce in this transformed curriculum. So lots of anxiety and trust all at the same time. So part of leadership is about managing these tensions and dilemmas. And so, yeah, I've spent a lot of time in that space of letting go. And so I'm really practicing the letting go at the moment. So we wouldn't be good educationists if we didn't have some theories, models, and frameworks. And so I'm not going to go through educational frameworks with you, because you're all probably even more skilled than I am. But certainly from a leadership point of view, leadership theories over time have just been immense. So, we've gone from, all the way from great man theory and trait-based approaches and behavior-based approaches, all the way through to kind of transformational and authentic leadership approaches. We've gone, and we now at least are moving away from individual only to much more team-based and collective-based approaches, complexity leadership to global leadership, process-related models. This is a looking at the kind of more commonest theories and what people prefer to use, and you can kind of see some of the linkages between them. But the reality is that there are almost as many different definitions and theories of leadership as there are persons who've attempted to define the concept. And so what do you do with all of this when you're engaging in the space? I've done some work with a colleague in Sierra Leone, where we've been looking at how people understand leadership. And in fact, when we started to map it out, it pretty much looked like this. And so we did a scoping review on leadership development programs in low to middle income countries. In fact, we did the scoping review across the world. And in fact, very few leadership development programs, in fact, have a base framework. And so often are not underpinned by good scholarly practice. And so then even when you find a theory, that you can see there are these multitudinous theories. And so some of the work that Drath and colleagues have done is to say, well, actually, if we start to try and understand what are the commonalities of some of these theories for leadership, is that this kind of, most of them boil down to this tripod ontology. And the tripod ontology really looks at leaders. So we kind of look at leaders, followers, and then some sort of shared goal. And then there are the elements of context or situational variables that affect that. So how Draft describes it is that we really have these kind of the leaders looking at both characteristics or behaviors or attributes or competencies, which is a manifestation of both characteristics and behaviors, impacting on followers, and followers likewise impact on leaders, and ultimately then we hopefully get to these shared goals. And so he says that most of these kind of multitudinous theories come to have this kind of tripod ontology that we understand it by. And so he's taken that to a next level and said, well, maybe we can take it a bit further. And so before I get to the Draft model, is that we, as you read out in my brief, in my bio, that some of the work that we've done is in South Africa, and interestingly, our Department of Health said we don't want different universities to come to different conclusions. So all of you must work together as a collaborative and come up with a single leadership competency framework. And so this was incredible. 3 different universities in the same setting actually came up with a consensus. Can you believe it? A consensus document or approach. And so we had this inductive and deductive approach, and I won't go into detail, although I am happy to do so, but we really came to understand that particularly very Western and global North views are very individualistic around leadership and kind of focus on the leader making the big difference. And in fact, we found in a lot of the literature, which is also our experience, that in fact, even if you have really brilliant individual leaders, that unless you start to look at competencies of the team, it actually doesn't work, because most of our work in health systems and in education is in teams. And in fact, if you don't have an enabling environment, that similarly it doesn't work. And so we worked on this concept of this distributed leadership through individuals, competencies, team competencies, and system capabilities. And so we ended up with this holistic model of competence across those different levels, looking at cognitive competencies, functional competencies, social competencies, and then these meta competencies, which are really this kind of broader culture, systems, complexity type of competencies. And so some ways that we're able to analogize that is really looking at these kind of multitudinous individual competencies grouped into teams, then grouped into institutions, and then looking at a broader system level of these system enablers that allow leadership to flourish and exist. And so this newer framework that Drath has come up with really resonates for me and is part of the work that we're using in this program that we've put together, which is this direction, alignment, commitment, and saying that we have these individual leadership beliefs or competencies and practices together with collective leadership, which then looks at this leadership culture in this broader context that then drives direction, alignment, and commitment. And so whatever your ultimate goal is, it's really through direction, alignment, and commitment that happens, and that you end up with these longer term outcomes. And so I really enjoy this particular DAC ontology, which kind of helps to explain a number of these very numerous leadership theories. And so I just thought that I'd share some of this theoretical framing for you because it may not be something that you've particularly been exposed to in some of the health professions educational space. And so I do speak very quickly, and I was trying to keep track of time, and so I hope that I've got up to this point, that I can open up to questions. And I've given you a whistle-stop tour through South Africa, through our own faculty, through the complex process we're going through, and then through a little bit of leadership theory. So I hope that that's been useful, colleagues, and I'm very, very happy to engage in some discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran. I'm speechless. I'm in awe of all that you have been doing, and everything sort of stems from practice. And that is what made us like really glued to the screen and just kept watching. Because basically, though you say it's in South Africa, at the end of the day, any organization, I think globally, the competencies that you talked about, individual leadership, team competencies, and then spreading over later on to the organizational framework. And then how you brought in community of practice, and how you said change agents are so important, and how you connected the stakeholders, and I mean, how you have designed this curriculum, and how you have stressed on individual leadership qualities, and what as organization we can do to create such elements. Like, it's splendid. Like, I'm like totally like, I don't know, I'll take some time to really digest and internalize this and start all over again. So I would like to ask participants if they have a few questions, and then maybe I'll take questions from the chat box. And then Kiran, how much more time do you have? Do you have 10 more minutes?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I've got 10, 15 minutes with pleasure.
Yeah. So the participants can raise their hands, or can leave your questions in the chat box, and we shall resume the session. So
sure. So I'm going to answer. I can see some of the things. So if you want to check that, but maybe I can answer some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, if you can see it, you can answer, Kiran.
Yeah, and then please do raise your hands. So Elsa, very nice to see you, Elsa.
Hi, Elsa.
It's so lovely to see. I wish we could all be in person, you know, but it doesn't. Sometimes. But it does allow us to be able to engage, which I suppose we weren't really that au fait with. So, Elsa, I'll come back to you. I see your hand up as well, but you've asked about whether ELF is offered to the outsider. And I think that what we're hoping to do in future is to be able to do that. I think for now, what we were really trying to do is to say, as an organization, we're struggling with, as you heard me say initially, this kind of trauma that this organization has been through, and trying to build culture at the same time as building a new curriculum, at the same time as building some of the scholarship. So for the moment, for this year and next year, it's only for insiders. But I do think that we miss out, because most of my previous leadership work has very explicitly been focused on making sure that we learn from each other. And so having different people coming from different spaces is really important, because we learn from each other from different contexts. So for now it's inside, but I'm really hoping that we can build this to be something that can be for outside as well.
Yeah, we really look forward, and it's amazing to see the community of practice getting into. I think because we had curriculum change in India all over in the medical science and in the health sciences fraternity, I think that's going to be a way through in looking at the change in the transforming the education and practice. I think that's really, you did a fantastic job. Amazing, amazing presentation. So,
I hope I was trying to do everything in a hurry, so I'm sorry that it was very rushed, and I hope I didn't lose everybody along the way. Yeah, thanks, Elsa.
Thank you.
And I see then the models used for evaluation and the product. So Tara, thank you for that. I hope I'm correctly pronouncing you, and you've also asked for an email address. So I am just popping my email address into the chat, and you're all very welcome to access. Otherwise, Vanutha can put you in touch with me. So I think that the models used for evaluation, we are using Kirkpatrick to have a look at that for now. And then looking at really that evaluating. So part of what I'm trying to do is whether I can get, is to start looking at building a PhD for myself around educational leadership identity. And so it will be looking at, yeah, quite a lot of identity development, and I'm still very, very new at it, but I'm looking at using some of the legitimation code theory as an evaluation framework, if that helps you. So yeah, so that's some of that. And then I see somebody's got their hand up, but there's another.
Yeah, he's Dr. Pradeep sir is our Vice Chancellor of the Academy, under whose leadership, like all what you talked about is like reflected in his leadership in our Academy. So over to you.
Oh, what an honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Karin, excellent message from you. I just want to ask a small clarification. As a part of the curriculum training for the medical healthcare workers, is the leadership component included in the curriculum? If so, what component? Because every healthcare worker need to be a leader. So is there incorporation of leadership skills and competencies in the curriculum of the healthcare?
So Prof, it's a little bit implicit at the moment. And so we look at, so we are looking at the CanMed graduate attributes, which as you know includes leader manager. But I'm quite concerned that it isn't sufficiently embedded in the longitudinal part of the curriculum. So there's a sense that, but I'm also concerned that in fact our teachers haven't got leadership competency. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. And so what I'm trying to do at the moment is build a little bit of leadership competence in the educational leaders first, in our teachers and conveners. And part of the curriculum transformation is that we will have a much more explicit leader manager competency development as part of the curriculum. So part of what I designed in my previous life at the previous university was exactly that we started leadership development right from year one, and then built on that, so that similar to the way that we do with all of our other attributes, that we built that very explicitly. But for the moment, it isn't anywhere near done as it should be. It's
okay.
Little bits. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Kirin, we have a hand that is raised, and we also have a question on the chat box. How much emphasis is given to communication from Karma Chains in Bhutan, as it's an integral part of leadership? After that, we'll go to Niranjan from.
Yeah. So Karma, it's fundamental, and so much of communication. There's a huge emphasis on communication, but I think very importantly is that the communication really comes from understanding ourselves first. What's the conversations that we're having in our heads? And until we can understand the self-talk and the self-thoughts, we're not going to really make an impact on interpersonal communication and group communication. And so we start inside ourselves, and then with the conversations we have with ourselves, and then we start. But there's a massive emphasis on communication. All of managing stakeholders is about communicating. All of influence and change agency is about how you communicate. So it's quite fundamental. I haven't shared the detail of the curriculum, but absolutely, it's fundamental. Thank you.
Niranjan? You can unmute and ask a question. I think he was asking about sabbatical. I see a question from Niranjan in the chat box. Greetings from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Dr. Beck, do you believe sabbatical can enhance leadership?
So I think that that it's really, for that, I think is about the reflective space, right? So if you're unable to find a time to think, so I think that for that respect, that it's about time to think. If we don't create and carve out time that takes us out of being on the treadmill, then I think that that sometimes we need enforced time to think, and sabbaticals can be very helpful, dedicated times to think. So from that point of view, I think that it can absolutely enhance leadership. But of course, it's always about how you use your sabbatical. You know, if you need to be very intentional about using it for that purpose of reflection and understanding and looking at the long term. And we're never going to grow our leadership if we're only focused on what I call navel gazing. When you're looking internally inside the organization and all that you're worried about is what's happening. So if your agendas and your meetings and your diary is only filled with urgent and not long-term important, then we're not going to be making long-term progress. And so in those respects, I think sabbaticals can be very helpful. But I do think that it's really around the time to think and reflect.
There's one from Amit Kumar, which says leadership qualities are like a trait. Isn't that it should be the part of early school education rather than implementation on later stage in adult education?
So I think, Amit, that is a, so I think if you notice that I specifically put in personal leadership and self-mastery. So I think leading others, there's an element that is, that can be trained, and I think that some people find it more intuitive. So I think that the parts of leadership that should be part of early school education, I agree, are the understanding ourselves and who we are and how we tick and how to reflect. I think that those are really important, and those we can teach from young. I agree.
Yeah.
And I agree that emotional intelligence is absolutely part of leadership development. So, and I agree in other fields as well. It's really about understanding self, how we tick, and therefore what our impact is on others, until we start to understand what our impact is on others. So I generally always include some form of assessment, only because it holds up a mirror. And most people are not used to looking at themselves in the mirror. And so it holds up a mirror to say, oh my word, I didn't realize that. So I use Johari window quite a lot, because I remind people that there are parts of ourselves that we choose to keep hidden. There are parts of ourselves that we don't know about because, yeah, that's how our psyche is built. And so there's a bit of psychological literacy, but it's really about applying it to ourselves and to others, rather than kind of looking at it from a patient perspective, which is how most of us learn psychology is kind of otherized. It's patients out there, not me. And so it's really about looking at me, myself, and I, and how I tick. And I think that's really important to build into our curricula, is to help our students understand themselves early on. And I think we'd have a lot less problems later on.
Actually, you touch upon a lot of elements where individually people can consider themselves accountable for any successful implementation of anything, rather than like bottom-down approach or top-down approach. So I think the curriculum that you're designed makes everyone feel like a part of, like, say, take the onus of being a part of it, like moving away from center to periphery. So I think it's a good design. Do you have any prerequisite for this? Like, do you consider any prerequisites for taking up these fellowships? Like, suppose I have to start such a kind of a fellowship in my academy. What do you think are the prerequisites that are needed for someone to enroll for such a course?
So we made our prerequisites that there was, that you had to have buy-in from your department. So the other thing that I haven't mentioned is that I'm building this into the governance structure of the university. So these then are obliged to be part of the discussion of our governance committees, so that this doesn't become a nice to have that's sitting on the top, the cream on the top, and then disappears in years to come, but it actually becomes embedded in the workings of what we do and on our agendas and what we discuss. And so for me, that was more of a prerequisite than anything else, was that the person had to be involved and enthusiastic. So we do have kind of people who are the willing early adopters, but we also, they have to be supported. And so, for instance, now I'm going back to heads of department and saying, so now how are you enabling the person? So we're changing the environment as well as the people. And so that then hopefully with this kind of tipping point, this critical mass, that then even those who aren't early adopters would then easily kind of come into a space and won't feel like they need to be putting themselves out there, that it becomes inculcated. I think there's Dr. Prasad still has his hand up, is that right?
Prasad sir, you can ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Karan, on a very nice and extensive presentation on a curriculum which has been developed for educational leadership. In India or otherwise also, when you look at this curriculum to be implemented and the outcomes, the way you have related it to the environment, that is the social changes that this curriculum will be bringing around, and the economic impact of this curriculum, all those things, disease burden reduction. So what I am really looking at is how are you going to assess this? Because it will take a long time for the impact of this curriculum to really be felt. The leaders coming out of this curriculum and bringing in the changes or the required impact on these things. So how are you going to monitor this? Because that is very important for the political leaders to understand the importance of continuation of these type of activities, and specifically bringing in or increasing the collaborative sort of involvement of everybody, what you were telling, doctors to non-doctors and all the other people to come into this. So how are you going to, in other ways, sell your curriculum? That is what was my basic question.
Really good question. So some ideas, and I think, but certainly not all completely thought through in terms of the longitudinal. So initially we're tracking the group as well as the individuals, as well as the institution, tracking the identity formation as well as the in practice. So we will be measuring the actual changed curricula. And fortunately, we're able to, that we have quite a lot of metrics on our students. So obviously we're wanting to start to see some of those shifts going forward. So to be able to track where our students end up and how they're seen in terms of social accountability as well. So for us, one of our key deliverables, which we're not sure we're delivering on at the moment, is social accountability. And so I'm hoping to convince the faculty to be able to link into some of the measuring tools, such as the Aspire model with AME, etc., or TOUGH. So we a member of TOUGH, the Unity for Health Care. So I think that we're looking at some of those aspects for kind of bigger. I think the challenge always is, as you know, is to prove causation, because, you know, there's so many moving parts here. But I think that what we're really kind of monitoring more than anything else is around the how, and then tracking qualitatively the experience. So if we can track that through multiple interventions, that our throughput is improving of our students, the student experience is improving, teacher experience is improving. So I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years since I've been here working on teacher experience, because they haven't felt empowered. It's been a particularly brutal space for teachers with a lot of protest action and a lot of trauma. So there's also a lot of trauma-informed kind of engagement. So a lot of what I've been doing is community of practice work, so that they can actually just feel safe, actually. And then, so a lot of experiential sense, but then also, so what I'm not sure yet is around measuring the deep changes. So I'm fortunately have background in my leadership space around culture tools to be able to measure organizational culture. And so that's one of the other areas that would be really helpful to look at. And then measuring our partners, you know, our provincial, we have a very close relationship with our partners, and being able to see the differences as time goes on. So yeah, but it's a very loaded question, and yeah, we have to kind of keep working on it as I go. So any advice is welcome. Thank you.
We would really like to collaborate and keep this communication on, so that we get a lot of inputs from you, and we could rather use our template as scaffold for developing further leadership programs. And one thing that you talked about, the enabling environment, that would rather sort of help them volunteer rather than impose leadership on them. Thank you so much, Karen. Shall we have a group photo? All of you can turn on your